August 10th, 1628. Stockholm. The most powerful warship in the Baltic leaves the palace quay on her maiden voyage, in front of a harbour full of people who came to watch her go. She sails about 1,300 metres. Then she heels over, takes water through her open gun ports, and settles onto the bottom of her own harbour with about 30 people still aboard. For 400 years, the story has been that a king ruined her, that Gustav Adolf meddled with the design, demanded more guns than she could carry, and drowned his own flagship with his vanity. That is not what the evidence says. And we can check, because the evidence is still here. Start with what is not in dispute. Vasa was top-heavy. The Vasa Museum states it plainly. The upperworks of the hull were too tall and too heavily built for the relatively small amount of hull below the waterline. She carried 2 full gun decks, and above them a superstructure loaded with carved and gilded ornament. Hundreds of sculptures, all of it weight and all of it high. That ornament was not decoration in the way we would mean it. It was the argument. A warship of this period was a statement about the power of the man who paid for her, and the statement was carved into her stern and painted and gilded so it could be read from another ship. Every sculpture was a sentence. Every sentence had mass, and every sentence sat above the waterline. A ship stays upright because of a quiet argument between 2 points. Her weight pulls down through one. The water pushes up through another. As she leans, the water's push swings outboard of her weight, and that offset is what levers her back upright. Load enough mass high enough, and past a certain angle, the offset collapses, the argument ends, and there is nothing left to bring her back. So the popular story gets the symptom right. She was unstable. Nobody disputes that she was unstable. Where the story goes wrong is the cause. It says a king reached into the shipyard and made her that way. The more interesting question, the one the ship herself can answer, is how a professional yard building for a king produced a hull like this at all. Vasa's keel was laid by a Dutch-born master shipwright working in the Stockholm yard, Henrik Hubertsson. He fell ill in late 1625. By the summer of 1626, he had handed over day-to-day supervision. He died in the spring of 1627, roughly a year before the ship was finished. Supervision passed to his assistant, Henrik Jakobsen, known as Hein. And here is what that meant. In the Dutch tradition of the time, shipwrights did not build from drawings. There was no master plan to inherit. The proportions lived in the head of the master. The ratios, the allowances, the 1,000 small judgments that turn timber into a hull that floats level. So when the master died, what he knew died with him. Jakobsen finished a ship whose design existed, in large part, inside a man who was no longer there to be asked. Between the salvage and today, the Vasa Museum's research director, Fred Hocker, did something nobody had done. He measured the ship, not a model of her. Every timber in the actual hull. Because Vasa survives, raised in 1961 after 333 years on the harbour bottom, essentially intact. The forensic evidence is not a reconstruction or an inference. It is the ship. What he found first was that she is asymmetric. In Hocker's words, there is more ship structure on the port side of the hull than on the starboard side. More ship on one side than the other, on a vessel already carrying too much weight too high. Then he found the reason, and it had been lying in the wreck the entire time. 4 rulers used by the workmen have been recovered from the ship. 2 of them are calibrated in Swedish feet, divided into 12 inches. 2 of them are calibrated in Amsterdam feet, divided into 11. Carpenters from both Sweden and the Netherlands were working on this hull at the same time, and the 2 feet were not the same length. Hocker puts it like this. When somebody tells a carpenter to make that thing 4 inches thick, his 4 inches is not going to be the same as the next guy's 4 inches. Think about what that does over a whole ship. Not one catastrophic error. Thousands of small ones, all of them made correctly, each man cutting accurately to the rule in his own hand. The frames on one side come out a little heavier than the frames on the other. Nobody notices, because nobody's wrong. The error is not in any cut. It is in the fact that the yard was running two incompatible systems at once on the same hull in the same weeks. And there is no moment where anyone could have caught it. That is what makes it different from the story we usually tell about disasters. There is no memo, no argument, no man who saw the danger and was overruled. There is only a yard full of competent people, each of them measuring carefully, producing between them a ship that leaned. The mistake was invisible precisely because everyone was doing their job properly. You cannot find that error by looking harder at any one person's work. It only exists in the space between two of them. Now the part that turns this from an engineering story into something harder. In the summer of 1628, before she ever sailed, Vasa's own captain, Zurfring Hansen, arranged a stability demonstration. 30 men ran back and forth across her upper deck to set her rolling. Vice Admiral Claes Fleming stood and watched it. She heeled one plank, then two, then three. Fleming stopped the test after 3 passes because he feared the ship would capsize at the dock in front of the Vice Admiral, weeks before the maiden voyage. Hansen had already reported to Fleming that the ship was, in the word of the period, crank, unstable, tender, unwilling to stand up, and the record does not show Fleming raising any of it with the king. She sailed on schedule. On the day, Hansen left the gun ports open as she got underway. The museum is direct about this. It was a fateful decision. Had they been closed, water could not have poured in. So he is both men. The captain who staged the test that proved she was dangerous, and the captain whose open ports let the harbour in. Carrying only one half of that would make a neater story and a false one. A tribunal convened on the 5th of September, 1628. Hansen was arrested and questioned, and then released. And then, nobody was punished. Nobody was found guilty of negligence. The blame effectively settled on Henrik Hubertsson, the shipwright, who had been dead for more than a year. That is the shape of it. A ship too tall for her hull, built by 2 crews working to 2 different measures, finished by a man completing a dead man's design, tested and found dangerous in front of a vice admiral, sailed anyway on the day, and then explained by a court that punished no one living. The king's vanity makes a tidier story. It puts the fault in one place, at the top, and it lets every other person in the yard and the Admiralty off the hook. The rulers are harder to live with. They say the failure was distributed, that it lived in the gap between 2 teams of skilled men who each believed, correctly, that they were doing the job right. And we know all of it for one reason. She went down in 20 minutes, in shallow water, in her own harbour, close enough to the surface that she was still there to be raised and measured and finally asked. Most disasters take their evidence with them. This one left it floating in a museum, waiting 3.5 centuries for somebody to bring a ruler of their own.